Stewarding a surplus isn't about clever spreadsheets. It's about hearts aligned with God's purposes. Hi, I'm Rob West. When the Lord entrusts us with more than we need, it can quietly become a spiritual and relational challenge just as much as a financial one. Rachel McDonough joins us today to talk about it. And then we'll take your phone calls at 800-525-7000. That's 800-525-7000. This is Faith and Finance Live, biblical wisdom for your financial journey. Well, it's a pleasure to welcome back my friend Rachel McDonough. She's a certified Kingdom advisor, a certified financial planner, and the author of the incredible and brand new novel, The River and the Garden. Rachel, it is great to have you here.
Thanks, Rob. Happy to join you.
Rachel, as you know, we don't often talk about novels on this program. Maybe we should, but this one is absolutely worth the exception. You spent 20 years crafting financial plans, yet your new release is a parable, not a manual. So, Rachel, why trade spreadsheets for fiction? Tell us the backstory.
Yeah, great question. When my publisher originally suggested that I do a fiction on the topic of stewardship, I kind of questioned the judgment call myself. I thought, wait a second, I'm a real nonfiction person. Lots of how-to manuals have gone through my reading list over the years. But,
Sure.
You know, Jesus taught in story, and I thought if it's good enough for Jesus, my goodness, it should be good enough for us.
Yes.
But really, the joke is there. But underlying is that story can speak to our hearts in a way that spreadsheets and bullet points cannot sometimes. And real families don't fit neat and tidy frameworks. Real families have relational challenges and tension and conflict to work through sometimes around stewardship. And while most of the wealth management industry is very good at focusing on technical aspects and optimization techniques, there's an awful lot about the heart that gets left out of those conversations. And I think story has a way of reaching into our hearts and inviting us into transformation in a way that how-to guides cannot.
Well, that is well said. Folks, I know you all have been calling and asking about faith-based investing, and Christians are discovering their values and then their investments do not need to live separately. And this book is one that will just open your heart and your mind to perhaps what God has for you. So check out theriverandthegarden.com. It's beautiful, but even more than that, it's just an incredible story. And speaking of that story, Rachel, take us in. Tell us what it's actually about.
Yeah, a little context. So the Craig family, it's 3 generations. Maddie is the grandma, the matriarch, who has come into a surplus with the sale of a business. Her son, Roger, who is an analytical, hard-charging executive type. And Willow, her granddaughter, who is a young artist who doesn't want anything to do with numbers or spreadsheets or money. Okay. And yet she is the one who tends to see the connections that other people miss. So imagine this journey. There's a family, 3 different generations with 3 different perspectives, and they decide to come together and go on some different adventures together, visiting an overlooked neighborhood around Dallas, even taking a trip to Rwanda and exploring some investment and donation opportunities abroad. And all the while looking for the answers of what does it really look like to steward a surplus faithfully?
Yeah, it's incredible. And obviously there's some just beautiful imagery here that you use. So the river represents capital. The garden represents what we choose to water or cultivate, which is such a helpful way to reframe investing. Let's talk, though, Rachel, about the stagnant reservoirs, because there's a powerful scene in one of Willow's dreams where the water appears stagnant. What does that signal, and why should it unsettle a thoughtful Christ follower?
Yeah, the dark reservoirs in one of Willow's dreams. Roger discovers things looking for answers in spreadsheets, but Willow discovers and receives revelation through dreams, the way an artist might.
Yeah.
And in one of her dreams, she sees these dark pools of capital, kind of the representation of capital, and they look like they're kind of stagnating, right? And now that could unsettle us for 2 reasons. Number one is because capital never really stands still. We think of it as sitting in our investment accounts, but really it's always moving. It's always flowing towards something. And in her dream, she notices that these stagnated, unattended pools are flowing towards the dark corners of industry where negative things can happen, instead of flowing towards positive types of purposes and businesses through intentional stewardship.
Exactly right. Well, we're going to continue to unpack this incredible story, The River and the Garden, with Rachel McDonough after this break. Don't go anywhere. Faithfully stewarding a surplus isn't primarily a technical problem. It's a relational and spiritual one. Hi, I'm Rob West. We're talking about a brand new novel called The River and the Garden. Joining me today, my friend Rachel McDonough. She's a CFP and a certified Kingdom advisor, and she's the author of this incredible new resource. You're going to want to check it out. If you've been thinking about aligning your values as a Christ follower with your deployment of capital in the public or the private markets, this novel is going to help you think about it in a way that I think will just capture your heart and your imagination and really move into this area perhaps in a way that you haven't before. Go to theriverandthegarden.com. And by the way, there's a garden audit assessment there that you're not going to want to miss. Again, that website, theriverandthegarden.com. And then you'll find links to pick up a copy of the book at Amazon or wherever you buy books. Now, Rachel, before the break, we were talking about how the river represents capital and the garden represents what we choose to water or cultivate. And we talked about this powerful scene in one of Willow's dreams, one of the characters in the book, where the water appears stagnant. And you talked about how this image is unsettling for us as stewards in two ways. One is that the capital doesn't really sit still. It's invested in things that are not neutral, that may be the dark corners of industry. But there was a second reason it's unsettling. Take us into that.
Yeah, the second reason is we think so much our default is to have stewardship being focused on provision, especially around investing. Investing is for the sake of provision. And that's good and it's right. But when we find ourselves stewarding a surplus, we need to expand our vision. What is the purpose of the surplus? If it's more than enough for provision for the family, what else is it for? And so that idea of stagnant pools, I think also could be unsettling to us in the sense that wealth needs to be assigned a purpose according to the vision and the calling that God has for our lives and for our families in order for it to be effective. It's meant to be fuel, like an accelerant for whatever purposes that God has in our lives.
Rachel, I know you and your husband have made some personal investment decisions, really with great prayer, that go further than maybe what most people would consider comfortable. Tell us what that has looked like for the two of you.
Yeah, I think for us, there should always be a tension in there, that provision versus surplus and the impact that we want to have with our surplus. But for us, we have felt that, like even the non-retirement savings that we have, we've decided to go a little bit edgier on the impact side and say, well, even if these resources maybe we could accomplish a little bit better risk-adjusted returns with some conventional investments, we've taken a portion and said, let's invest in, like one of the redemptive businesses that we've invested in is really trying to solve a cure for cancer, and not in a way that only serves affluent people, but also makes those resources and solutions in medical treatment available to the global South.
Interesting.
And so we're just looking at, these are college funds for our kids. It's not like this is money that we're just taking and wanting to gamble with. It has a serious outcome. But we're also wanting to live into, like, what does it look like to really trust God as being the provider and live in that tension of kind of provision versus impact goals that we have for the resources God has entrusted.
And you've really named that portion of your financial plan specifically for this purpose. I mean, this hasn't been haphazard, right?
It's not haphazard. We embrace the tension of having multiple bottom lines, but it's prayerful. It's done with good analysis on the back end on the financial plan and with mutual prayerful decision and agreement with us as spouses.
We're talking with Rachel McDonough today, certified Kingdom advisor. She's the author of the new book, The River and the Garden. Rachel, who is this book for, and what is your prayer for them as they encounter it?
Yeah, I think everyone has a family, so everyone can glean a little something from the story, but it's really meant for those who have been entrusted with more than they need
Yeah.
And their hearts are asking, what does it look like to steward this surplus faithfully? What is it for? And maybe you know someone who's recently inherited or has decided to sell a business and has a liquidity event coming. The story is meant to help us not only to see wealth as fuel for purpose, but also start building out context for what types of options are out there that are not on most people's radars. When you heard me share my example of investing in a medical company that's trying to solve the cure for cancer, like that's a little small startup company. Most people are not doing that type of investing. We're mostly doing stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and whatnot. But surplus needs to be managed differently than the resources that are needed for our provision. And when we come into that space of being an accredited investor, maybe 5 million and up, or even an accredited investor with over $1 million, if it's truly a surplus, new options open up to us both in donating and in investing that just maybe have not been a part of the picture up until this point. And so the story, without being there's no sales pitch, but it just gives examples through story of the different types of investment opportunities that the Craig family explores together.
I love that. The emotional core is the father-daughter journey between Roger and Willow. What does their arc teach us about aligning head and heart?
Yeah, Roger really embodies that technical mastery. He's not curious at the beginning of the story because he thinks he already has found the answers and the strategies of how to invest for optimization. And then Willow really embodies that relational insight, the longing for transformation. She really wants the world to be a better place. And she also starts not very curious because she doesn't want to think or talk about money. She's seen the ways that pursuing wealth and growing business has actually been costly relationally for her family. And so she wants nothing to do with it. But what they discover is that as they go on this journey of learning together and even beginning to appreciate and understand each other's perspective, is that when they come together, they begin to learn what it looks like to balance prudence with hope, responsibility with imagination, diligence and courage. And the result of them working together is that they begin moving from just this optimization type of default that we see in investing towards transformation, and allowing the capital to move in a direction that's aligned with calling for the family.
Wow, that's powerful. I want to cover an insightful moment in the story where Granz reflects on the windfall from the sale of the business her husband started. Now, this is fiction, but there's so much truth to it. So I'd love for you to actually read a few of those lines for us. And let's talk about how real families move from optimization to this purposeful impact you've been talking about without fracturing relationships.
Yeah, toward the end of the story, when they're kind of coming in for a landing, Grant says, "The uncomfortable truth is that Jack and I probably worked too hard and sacrificed too much, and I can't do anything about that now. The time has been spent, but at least let the money count for something. I want to find where God is at work in the world and join him in that beautiful work, even if my part is mostly just writing checks or giving encouragement or praying. I want to punch some holes in the darkness before it's too late." I think that heart posture that is articulated by Gran is really the sense and the kind of the heart that I've heard from a number of different investors who are stewarding a surplus.
Yeah, well, Rachel, I know this story is near and dear to your heart, and I'm just praying that God uses it to open up a whole new generation of people who are now exposed to aligning their capital to God's redemptive purposes. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's Rachel McDonough. You can find her book, The River and the Garden, and the Garden Audit Assessment at theriverandthegarden.com. Don't miss it, theriverandthegarden.com. We'll be back with your questions after this break. So call right now, 800-525-7000. Stick around.
The opinions offered during this program represent the personal or professional opinions of the participants given for informational purposes only. Any information provided is not intended to replace advice from a financial, medical, legal, or other professional who understands your specific situation.
Thanks for joining us today on Faith and Finance Live. I'm Rob West. Well, the calls have started coming in. That means it's time for your questions today. Here's the number, 800-525-7000. Again, that's 800-525-7000. We'd be delighted to hear from you today and be able to tackle your financial questions in light of biblical wisdom. Coming up in the last segment today, Jerry Boyer stops by. We'll get Jerry's take on what's moving the markets. We'll also get Jerry to weigh in on what he's gearing up for as the next corporate engagement season begins. That's all in our final segment today with Jerry Boyer. In the meantime, let's dive in. We're going to head to Indianapolis. Steve, how can I help, sir?
Hey, Rob. I have a couple questions, if you would indulge me.
Sure.
The first one is kind of related to what your last guest was talking about. My mom went to be home with the Lord back in January at about 98 years old almost. And her estate has afforded us about $50K in surplus funds. So I want to get your opinion on options trading to attempt to increase that more quickly than, say, just simply investing in the usual mutual funds. And as a little background, we have a friend who's in the options trading business, and he claims that we can double that amount with education on how to go about it in an informed way. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to options trading, I anything that kind of starts with we can grow this quickly, I'm a little suspect by, because the model that we see in Scripture is steady plotting, not get rich quick. Now, with that said, options can be a useful tool in the hands of experienced investors, but they can be, depending on what type of options trading you're doing, highly speculative. It's possible to lose a significant portion of your investments in a short period of time. Did he describe exactly what type of options trading he would be doing?
No, we didn't get into depth that much about it. So I think we're just going to have to maybe take a deeper dive into it and, pick his brain a little bit more about how we should go about it and how do we get informed so we can make good decisions about whether to do it or not.
I think that's right, because, for instance, there are some very conservative strategies like what are called covered calls, where you own the stock and you sell call options to generate additional income. Some people say you're kind of renting out your stock, so to speak, but you have to sell your shares if the stock price rises above the strike price. So there's tax implications there, or you could lose out on a stock that's rising in value. All the way down to some advanced strategies like, straddles and strangles and all kinds of things that are significantly more complex and generally aren't appropriate for individual investors. There's spreads, which is where you combine buying and selling options. You can buy puts, you can buy calls. So there's just a whole host of approaches here. And, I would think that the way to think about these is really a specialized tool, not a shortcut to wealth. So for most investors, especially when we're managing an inheritance, I would submit that just a diversified portfolio built for the long term is a much better foundation. But if you do use options, that would be for a small portion of your portfolio. You should fully understand the risks before placing a trade and, be able to explain it to, a friend or family member with good understanding.
Sure. Sounds like we've got some more research to do then.
I think so, yeah.
At this point. Okay, I appreciate that. But the second question also has to do with my mother's estate. And this is a small thing. It's bank related as far as procedural goes. But the bank is saying that the $100 that was left over in her savings account in her name has to go into probate because my name was on the checking account with her name. And since she's deceased now, that's my account. But they're saying that it has to go into probate to get that $100, hopefully, instead of just transferring it over simply. It's only $100. So does that make sense to you?
So it was a joint. It was a jointly owned with right of survivorship. Is that right?
Yes. So they're saying they need a death certificate, the original, and then they have to send it to the court and go through all this process. And I'm thinking, really, for $100?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it just doesn't sound right, because if it was joint tenants with right of survivorship, then it was ownership automatically passes to the surviving owner, which is you in this case, when one dies. And so that means it does not have to go through probate. Now, if it wasn't actually titled JTWROS, joint tenants with right of survivorship, that would be one possibility. In either case, you would need to show the death certificate for it to be retitled in your name only. But I would probably speak to a branch manager, ask them to explain why they're requiring probate. There may be something unique or there may be a misunderstanding here, but under normal circumstances, joint tenants with right of survivorship should pass automatically, without any probate.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I guess I'd probably have to show them proof of the joint tenant with right of survivorship papers. Maybe that would do it.
Yeah, I mean, they should have the title of the count without any question. That would be in their system, and then you would just have to show, based on how it's titled, that she did, in fact, pass away, and that would be a death certificate. Since it's only $100, there's a possibility that your state, in Indiana, I don't know, has a small estate affidavit or a simplified probate process, but there may be other things. This may just be one piece of, obviously all the other things in her estate. So, if it's a part of her estate and it's not titled that way, it would need to go through probate, even if it's only $100. But I think the question is, we can avoid that if, in fact, it was titled in such a way that you are now the sole owner. You just need to prove that she passed, and then that would automatically pass to you and be retitled. So I'd check back with the bank. Steve, thanks for your call today. We appreciate it. More questions right after this. Stick around. Thanks for joining us today on Faith and Finance Live. I'm Rob West. Well, we're taking your calls and questions today at 800-525-7000. Let's head right back to the phones. Let's go out to Illinois. Mark, how can I help?
Oh, hi. Hey, listen, I've been listening to WMBI for about 50 years now. Wow. And I got to tell you, your program is as solid as any I've heard on WMBI. So thank you for that.
Wow. Well, thank you, Mark. That means a lot. I appreciate that.
Well, my question is this. My wife and I are retired. She is the beneficiary of an IRA from her deceased father, and she has a separate 401k from her job. And my question is, how is the best way to merge these two so we can gain income from them?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of merging them, you can generally roll the 401k into your IRA or your own employer plan. So this is an inherited IRA, and it's a 401k with her current employer. Is that right?
Well, her former employer. She's retired now.
Okay, she is retired.
Yeah.
So you can merge those two. So essentially what happens is once you separate from employment, you can roll that 401k out. In some cases, you can roll it out while you're still working. It's called an in-service rollover, but that's much less common. But once you separate from service because you leave for another job or you retire, you can roll that 401k out. And that can be combined with that inherited let me take that back. Because there are different rules with regard to the inherited account, you would often not combine those just because you want to be able to follow the IRS distribution rules. Do you guys normally work with a CPA or do you manage your own taxes?
No, we have a tax accountant that we work with.
Okay, yeah. So you'd probably want to check with your CPA or accountant because you're probably going to be subject to the 10-year rule on the withdrawals of the IRA because that was a non-spouse inheritance. And so that will need to be withdrawn over 10 years. Now, you don't have to do it in equal installments. You can kind of do it at whatever pace you want, but the account has to be completely withdrawn within 10 years in most cases under Secure Act 2.0. And you'll normally want to space that out so that it doesn't get added to your taxable income in a large amount where it would push you up into a higher bracket. So most people do it over time. But because one is her account, and therefore she'd be able to let that continue to grow in the future, and one is an inherited IRA that would be under or subject to the distribution requirements, you'd probably want to keep those separately. So she would end up with two IRAs, the IRA, which would be the recipient of the 401k rollover, and then the inherited IRA, and those would have different distribution rates.
Okay, so the advice is to turn the 401k into an IRA.
Yeah, and the benefit there is, inside that 401k, she has a limited menu of investment options, which is nice while you're building wealth because it doesn't lead to analysis paralysis in the same way that having an unlimited number of investments gives you. But once you separate from employment and you retire and you've kind of are done accumulating, which means often you have, quite a nest egg built up, I think that's the time to roll it into the IRA under the management of an advisor, where the advisor can build the portfolio in such a way that it aligns with your other assets, namely your retirement accounts and any other assets you all have jointly. Understand your goals and objectives, your income needs, your risk tolerance, and then build a portfolio that's unique to you, and provide the financial planning as well, where you're determining what's the appropriate withdrawal rate and making sure you don't, cause increases in your Medicare premiums through something called IRMA and just kind of all of the other factors. So that IRA would essentially give you far more control over the management of the portfolio, the distributions, and the actual investment selections. But that's generally the way people go once they hit retirement. And if you don't already have an advisor, then, I'd encourage you to head to findacka.com and connect with maybe several certified Kingdom advisors there in Illinois and land on the one that's the right fit.
Okay. And then these have to be just kept totally separate then. Is that right?
Yeah, you wouldn't combine it because it's an inherited IRA from someone other than a spouse. And so it has to remain separately titled as an inherited IRA, or sometimes it's called a beneficiary IRA, because the distribution rules are different. And if the accounts were commingled, it would be difficult to tell how much needs to come out versus another account. But by keeping them separate, okay, with the inherited IRA or beneficiary IRA, I know that account needs to be completely exhausted in 10 years, whereas the IRA that's receiving the 401k rollover has no distribution requirements until she hits the required minimum distribution age of 73.
Right. So there's no way to combine these to produce income in a combined way, at least.
There isn't, but remember, in terms of producing income, it doesn't really matter whether they're combined or not, because, the income is going to be generated by the investments in each account. And, whether these investments are held in one consolidated account or they're in two accounts, that's really more of a, an administrative function than anything else. The income is generated by the amount of assets you have and the investments that are selected, more so than whether or not this is all under one account number or two.
Mm-hmm. But the withdrawals that we take from the inherited portion, that can go into the IRA then, right?
So if you take withdrawals from the inherited IRA, can you put them back into your own IRA? Only if you have earned income. So because she's not working, she doesn't have earned income. Now, if you're working and you have earned income, then she could contribute as a spouse of a working individual, but only up to the annual contribution limits. So over the age of 50 for 2026, that'd be $8,600.
Interesting. So that inherited portion, that's just kind of got to just float along as is. And we have to withdraw all of it and pay taxes on whatever we withdraw, of course, within 10 years. But we could put that into the recreated IRA from the 401k, right?
Yes. So you'd have an IRA that would be the beneficiary or the recipient of the 401k rollovers, and then you'd have the inherited IRA separately. The only way to get that money out of the inherited IRA, if once she's 70 and a half or older, she could do a qualified charitable distribution directly to a ministry, and if she wanted to do some, or you both wanted to do some giving. So that would be an option. But other than that, it is going to be taxable as it comes out, and it can only go back into her other IRA if she has earned income or she's the spouse of somebody who has earned income. So I know those rules are a little tricky there, but Mark, hopefully that clears it up. Hey, thanks for your kind remarks about the program. It means a lot. If I can help you further along the way, don't hesitate to reach out. God bless you. We're going to take a quick break and then back with much more right after this. Stay with us. Hey, thanks for joining us today on Faith and Finance Live. I'm Rob West. Jerry Boyer's here in this final segment. When Jerry joins us, we talk the economy, we talk corporate engagement. And Jerry, I want to start today. You and I were on a webcast this week with David Bahnsen. We had hundreds of advisors, and you and David had a fascinating conversation around going back to Genesis and seeing God's design for economics and wealth creation and productivity that was fascinating. Would you just give us a little primer on what that might look like?
Yeah, if you read the creation account in Genesis as opposed to the pagan creation myths, what you find is, in Greek philosophy, the change in the world is a problem, right? For Plato, the only thing that matters are abstract forms, like the perfect triangle, no actual triangle in the world, right? Or the perfect sphere, not an actual stone in the world. And the sort of the myths like that you have with the Odyssey or something like that. You have the gods fighting each other over scarce resources. They have you have to defeat one god has to defeat another god in order to get control of the sea. But you don't in the true creation account that you have in Genesis. You don't have that. What you have is that things are changing and they're growing, and God made them so that they grow in and of themselves. So he makes a world, but it's not a world that he makes and then it's stuck. It doesn't do anything, it's just inert, just sitting there. Instead, the seeds, the trees have the fruit, and the fruit has seeds in them, and the fruit drops to the ground, and the seeds become more trees, and the trees become more fruit, and the fruit becomes more, and it's just everything's growing all the time. And it's not scarce, it's abundant. In fact, it's so abundant that there's this kind of, a little bit unusual, confusing to some commentators' account, where God says, well, here in the land of Eden, we've got these plants and they're springing up, but, if they step too much, well, I don't have a man yet to till the ground and take care of this. I've got a job opening here, and I haven't filled this job position yet. So let's have mist rather than rain, because it's going to grow too much. It's like the creation is almost like too abundant. He's saying, okay, hold on, creation, hold on. I'm going to put a man here who's going to take care of this. And that creational aspect to the world, where it doesn't create out of nothing. Only God can create out of nothing, but it creates out of itself, right? Or, these seeds turn dirt into trees. That's pretty good creation. That's a lot for a little seed to do. So God's really good at creating seeds. Well, that's the basis of the real free market system of capitalism. Capitalism wouldn't work if it weren't for that. Because if the creation isn't generous and growing in and of itself, then if I get profit, I must have stolen it from you, or I must have outwitted you. But if we have, trees that are growing and there's more fruit and there's more trees, well, the farmer can make a living, but so can the investor, who said to the farmer, take a year off, do a lot of planting. I'll feed you this year. I'll pay you so that you can feed your family, and I want you to do a lot of planting and not harvest. Some of those fruits, instead of eating them, I want you to take them, dry them, take out the seeds, and then plant those and make more trees. The ability, that's what capital is. Capital is basically, it's from the Latin capita, which is head, right? It's our minds. capital is the situation where we pay somebody to learn something. They don't have to consume right away. They can take time. They can learn. And the investor and the person invested in can both make money. If I go for a small business loan, all your research can grow. Well, then, where's the interest payment to the bank come? Well, because there's enough for both of us. We split it. So we have profit and they have interest, and we can both grow. In pagan economics, it doesn't work that way, which is why when you abandon the genesis, when you abandon the creation account, even if you think you're committed to the free market system or capitalism, you won't be for long, because over time you're going to think that whatever somebody got, they got at somebody else's expense. Whereas we know a generous God created a world that just keeps growing, and we can make it grow even more. And in that kind of growing pie or growing tree that we can use to make pies, in that kind of world, we can all prosper and not at each other's expense.
Mm. And Jerry, one piece of this, which came up in one of the questions from the advisors, is, they're actually in this model, this biblical approach you described, and through capitalism is an opportunity to show love for neighbor, caring for the widow and orphan, not just from almsgiving, right?
Yes, this is something that I think we have to really be careful about when Christians start talking about the poor. At that point, we switch over to tithes and alms, and offerings for the poor. Now, tithes and offerings are they're for a number of purposes, right? They're for worship, they're for education, and they're for the poor. So certainly the generosity conversation is worth having in the context of the poor. Yeah. But if we fail to realize that the vast majority of the improvement in the life of the poor occurred outside almsgiving, it occurred by giving them a dignified living, just like we have a dignified living, right? It occurred by investing and growing and hiring and training, and then other people, poor people can become owners, right? And then they're helping. They can become affluent, and they can help other people not be poor. And then there are some people who, for whatever reason, just aren't reached by that. Maybe there's an addiction problem. Maybe something has just been really unfair to them. Maybe they made mistakes, but they understand they made mistakes. Or maybe things happened or no fault of their own. But that is going to tend to be the exception in a healthy society, and we make provision for that exception. But if we think that the only way we help the poor is by selling the investment, turning it into cash, and giving it away, I think not only we're missing the point, that isn't even the main way we help the poor. The main way a wealthy person helps a poor person is by giving them a job, or by providing a good and service at such a low rate, at such a low price, because they're so efficient that their standard of living rises. Even though they're poor, they can still have a decent standard of living. The main way we help the poor is by being productive. And then for those who somehow are broken off from the system, John Kennedy said a rising tide, lifts all boats. And then somebody came along and said, well, it doesn't lift the boats with holes in them. Okay. Almsgiving is for the boats with holes. We need to patch those holes. But so a rising tide lifts almost all boats, but not all boats. Yeah. And I think that once we get there, then we can have a conversation that focuses more on growth. Because is our goal, is the loving goal for a poor person to be always dependent on our goodwill and alms? That's more about me, isn't it, than it is about them. I mean, if we really love them, we would want them. If an affluent person really wanted to help a poor person, it would be to help that poor person become affluent themselves potentially. Because for a lot of people who are poor, they have risk-taking abilities, they have intelligence. It's just some things went wrong. I think a lot of it is addiction, maybe mental health issues, and those are solvable. And so dignity is treating them as an equal. And what that means is mainly think about how can I help this person in a marketplace way, and then think about, for those I can't help that way, then how do I help them for now, but eventually get them to the point where they have the same dignity that I do.
Yeah. Boy, that's well said, Jerry. Apply that to what we see going on right now in, for instance, corporate engagement, because I know when you come on this program, we talk often and celebrate the great work you're doing in calling out companies who, rather than being value creators, are taking and extracting value out of their companies and redirecting that to often things that are not their core business, right?
Yeah, well, there's a book it's actually like 20 years old or more that really had an impact on me by Myron Magnet called The Dream and the Nightmare. And what he argues in there is that the sexual revolution that we had in America was basically the idea of rich people. Like rich, the children of the wealthy went to graduate school and they thought, well, you know what, why shouldn't everybody just do whatever they want sexually? Who cares about marriage? Who cares about all that stuff? And that could seem plausible to them because daddy had a lawyer on speed dial, or, they could go off to rehab pretty easily. They were kind of buttressed away. They were shielded from the consequences of that. But then what he says is those ideas begin to migrate down into the middle class and then into the lower middle class and into the underclass, where people don't have that buffer, where that mistake, of a child born out of wedlock, you don't have everybody to kind of come in and help with that. And so that becomes that dream of the sexual revolution, and if it feels good, do it, becomes a nightmare when it gets down where people don't have that those margins and those protections. Now, it doesn't even work for the wealthy because it still harms your soul, right? But you can bounce back financially from those kind of mistakes, maybe not emotionally, but people at the bottom, they can't bounce back at all from the addiction. In the counterculture, the sexual revolution, basically it encouraged drug use, it encouraged promiscuity. That was unbelievably destructive to the poor. To the degree that corporations have participated in promoting those kinds of ideologies, especially the sexual revolution, they're not helping the poor, they're hurting the poor terribly. And so when we come in and we say to a company, stay out of all that stuff. It's not your job to tell who to, what kind of who to date, right? And to have employee resource groups based on who somebody is having relations with. That's not your job. And when you get into it, you make the wrong recommendations. At that point, just stick to what your core competency is, which is banking or making shoes or creating microchips. And that's the most compassionate thing you can do to the people on the margin, is to do the thing you're good at well, and then to leave moral and sexual guidance, say, to maybe their pastor, or their rabbi, because they're good at it usually, and you're good at banking or making shoes or microchips.
Well, and fortunately, more and more of them are listening, Jerry. Now, if we could just get more Christians to understand the power that they have as owners and shareholders, we could make some real progress, huh?
We've made huge progress with 98% of our brothers and sisters having their money used against us and not even knowing it. Imagine what happens when they wake up.
Incredible. Well, we'll continue to talk about it, Jerry. Thanks for your great work and for your time today.
Thank you. God bless you.
All right, that's Jerry Boyer, our resident economist. Faith and Finance Live is a partnership between Moody Radio and Faith Fi. Have a wonderful weekend. Come back and join us on Monday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.